If extraordinary times create extraordinary people, then the life of Ken Rice is truly spectacular.
Here's a man who was a China Marine, survived a death march in the Philippines, survived the sinking of his Hell ship, and survived the dropping of the second atomic bomb at Nagasaki.
Ken was born in February 1921 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, but went to live with his dad in Port Huron, Michigan as a baby. Unfortunately, a drunk driver killed his father when Ken was just 9 years old. He then went to Bad Axe, Michigan to live with his paternal grandparents. After graduating from high school, Ken enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1939. Ken never said why he enlisted. However, his father's World War I experience might have had something to do with it. Elmer Rice was a Distinguished Service Cross recipient. He received our nation's second highest military award for carrying messages through a heavy German barrage, as well as carrying wounded men to safety. Whether his father's heroics led Ken to enlist or not, it was a decision that would transform his life. After boot camp in San Diego, Ken was assigned to the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and sent to China. His duties included security at the dock facility near the international settlement. Ken remained in China until November 1941. The 4th Marines were then sent to the Philippine Islands. Less than a month after arriving, the Japanese attacked. At first, Ken was sent to build entrenchments near the airfields around Manila. As the Japanese forces moved their way closer to Manila, Ken and the 4th Marines were sent to the island fortress of Corregidor in Manila Bay. They improved the defenses here and worked through continuous Japanese naval and air bombardments. On May 5, 1942, Japanese forces landed on the island. Although the Marines held them off, after tanks were landed, General Wainwright decided to surrender. Although the siege of Corregidor had been a trying ordeal, the worst was yet to come for Ken.
Ken Rice ends up a prisoner of war. Although he wasn't on the Bataan Death March as we know it, Ken and the Marines and the other men that were on Corregidor are taking the exact same route.
As they were going, he said that they were given no food or water, 24 hours a day marching. They were given 10 minutes off of every hour. They were allowed to find a mud puddle to drink out of or a caterpillar to grubs to eat. And they learned really early on that they were not going to sleep laying down because some of those guys just couldn't stand back up.
Ken recalled there were trucks using the road we marched on. If you fell down in the road, the trucks would just run you over. After 67 tortured-filled miles in 16 days, the surviving prisoners reached Camp O'Donnell. Ken was then assigned to a working party that was sent to repair and lengthen the airfields. As a sergeant, Ken was put in charge of the detail. One day, he let another man have a break because that man was sick. Rice was beat almost to death with a pickaxe handle by the Japanese guard for allowing this. In mid-1943, Ken and hundreds of other prisoners were loaded onto unmarked transport ships to be transferred to POW camps in Japan. The prisoners nicknamed them Hell ships because of the crowded and unsanitary conditions on board. Ken was lucky to be billeted near the deck. On the way to Japan, the ship was torpedoed and sunk by an American submarine. Over 700 prisoners went down with the ship. Ken and about 400 others survived. Ken hung on to a barrel to stay afloat. As he watched sharks feed on the drowned bodies, he decided to stay as still as possible as to not attract the sharks' attention. The survivors were picked up by another ship, and they continued to Japan. Ken was sent to Camp Fukuoka near Nagasaki. He was put to work again, alternating between days spent loading and unloading ships in the dockyards and working in the coal mines underground. For 2 years, he kept reliving the same 2 days, first at the docks, then in the mines. To keep himself mentally busy, he recalled everyone he knew at home, talking in his head, remembering names, faces, and reliving incidents. Ken remembered seeing men who had given up. They would get a hollow, blank look. I knew they weren't going to survive. Terrible food, inadequate shelter, and the beatings continued for the prisoners. However, as the American forces began defeating Japanese forces throughout the Pacific, the treatment became a little better, to the point of, as Ken called it, buddy-buddy. As day after day of hard labor passed, the men hoped that the war would end. Their predicament changed on August 9th, 1945. That morning was a coal mine day for Ken and the other American prisoners.
He says that the power went out, and when the power went out, they figured the Japanese were just playing a trick on them. And he said that they just lit the little chemical lights that they had on their helmets, and they were going to get to work because they knew they were going to be held responsible for keeping their quota up. No matter what their excuses were, the Japanese wouldn't care. At the end of the next 12-hour shift, the Dutch prisoners still hadn't shown up to take over, and the lights were still out, and the vent fans were still cut off. Well, 3 days later, there's no fresh air. They're finding it very hard to breathe. The officers and non-commissioned officers draw straws. The gentleman who draws a short straw, his job is to go out and find out what's happening. At some point, eventually, the generators were kicked back on. He said when the guy got back, and they just told this fantastic tale that they just couldn't believe. And railroad ties that looked like bread ties. They were just so mangled. And it looked like somebody had picked up the locomotive and just twisted it from the engine to the caboose. That coal mine in that camp that they were at was at Nagasaki.
Ken looked out over the sheer destruction Nagasaki endured from the atomic bomb. "I've seen the sky dark with American planes over Japan," Rice said. However, they had never seen destruction like this. The prisoners were sent to another camp guarded by young boys with bamboo sticks. However, the war ended just 6 days later. Ken remembered getting new clothes from the army before getting on a plane for Okinawa. When he ate real food for the first time, he could not keep it down because of his malnutrition. He had gone from 160 pounds to 87 pounds during his confinement. Ken returned to the United States and remained in his beloved Marine Corps. He was eventually promoted to Sergeant Major and served 2 tours in Korea as a forward air observer before retiring from the Marines in 1960. In 21 years of unflinching service, Ken Rice had seen the best and the utter worst of humanity. He returned to his wife and daughter, and they moved to Saginaw, Michigan. Ken got a job as a sheriff's deputy, which he did for another 22 years before retiring again. In September 2019, the Alida E. Lutz VA Hospital in Saginaw, Michigan, dedicated a new outdoor pavilion to honor Sergeant Major Ken Rice. He was at the dedication and was overjoyed to be remembered in such a way. Sadly, just 2 months later, Ken Rice passed away at 98 years old. Although Ken is no longer with us, his memories and story live on due to the tireless efforts of the Michigan Heroes Museum in Frankenmuth, Michigan.